Imagine the worst part of your least favorite household task, and then imagine doing that every week in below freezing temperatures. Such was life in the 1800s. When winter arrived, wash day became something close to torture. Welcome back to the channel. Today we're talking about winter wash day in the 1800s. In the 1800s, few household tasks inspired more groans than wash day. And in winter, this chore became something close to torture. Washing clothes was never a light matter. It was an all-day, back-breaking job that turned Monday into the most dreaded day of the week for many households. Families often saved up piles of dirty clothes, linens, and undergarments for one massive washing session. And when the frosty months arrived, the misery multiplied. Picture this: you're a woman living in the 1800s. Your work as a wife and mother is never done. But every week you must set aside time to complete one of your most important duties, cleaning your family's clothing. You gather the week's worth of dirty laundry and head to the kitchen or perhaps a separate washroom in your home. But before you can even begin, you have to make preparations. Maybe you need to bring in firewood, or maybe you need to clear the snow from the pump house so you can draw water. If you live in a big city, you might have a luxury, a well inside your home. Still, even drawing water indoors required effort, since you would need to heat it before you could use it. The first order of business is heating water, a lot of it. The water used for washing was almost always heated in heavy iron kettles set over a roaring fire. This took time and a lot of fuel. A typical wash might require 3 or 4 kettles full. Each kettle held several gallons, meaning your fire will need to burn steadily throughout the morning. While the water heats, you scrub the tubs. These were typically made of wood, metal, or stone. Each tub held several gallons, meaning you scrub the tubs. These were typically made of wood, metal, or stone. Each tub held several gallons of water, meaning you'd need several tubs for a large family's worth of laundry. Once everything is clean and the fires are roaring, it's time to get to work. You begin by putting the clothes into one of the tubs. You add hot water and perhaps a little lye soap. Now you must agitate the water, which might mean pounding the cloth against the sides of the tub or using a plunger. Someone living in the 1800s might also use a washboard, which had a rough surface that helped scrape away dirt and grime. After the clothes are thoroughly soaked, you must rinse them. This means emptying the dirty water and filling the tub again with fresh, clean water. You repeat the rinsing process 2 or 3 times, making sure the clothes are free of soap and dirt before moving on to the next step, bluing. This gave the clothes their final rinse and made them smell fresh and sweet. Often the entire family participated in this step, including children too young to help with the washing. After bluing, the clothes were ready to be hung out to dry. And here the weather was critical. On a nice day, this would be a simple task, but if winter had arrived, you would need to find a sheltered spot inside your home or perhaps a nearby barn. No matter the weather, you must keep a close eye on the clothes as they dry. If they're exposed to the elements, they might be stolen or blown away. If they're inside, you need to make sure the fire doesn't get too close and cause a fire hazard. After the clothes are dry, you must iron them. This was usually the last step in the process, and it could take hours to finish. As you can see, wash day was not just laundry. It was a battle of survival against both filth and the season itself. How did people survive wash day in the winter? Let us know your thoughts. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. And as always, thanks for watching. Imagine, if you will, the most dreadful chore you can think of. Is it mowing the lawn? Is it cleaning the toilet? Please. Is it doing the dishes? Amateur. Now imagine that chore, but with the added twist of having to do it in freezing temperatures. Welcome to my channel. And today we're going to find out how people did their laundry in the winter. It's a beautiful, crisp winter morning. The sun is shining, the birds are tweeting, and you feel like tackling some chores. You head outside to find some massive piles of dirty laundry that have been piling up for weeks. You head back inside, fill up the washer, toss in your clothes, and start the machine. Finally some warm water swirling around your clothes. You add a little soap and softener, maybe some bleach, and then you leave to go tackle some other less odious tasks, knowing that when you return, your laundry will be done. That is how we do laundry today. But it wasn't always this way. In fact, for much of history, the process of doing laundry has been an exercise in frustration, tedium, and pain. But there was one time in particular that made the whole process even more miserable than normal: winter. And the reason why is simple: water. Doing laundry requires lots and lots of water. And if you live in a place where that water supply freezes, well, you've got a problem. Let us say you lived in a small village in 1850. The local river has frozen solid, and the laundry you've been meaning to get to for weeks now is starting to smell. So you head out to the river anyway, cut some holes in the ice, and plunge your clothes directly into the frigid water. After all, the water is under the ice, so how cold can it be? Then you begin the process of washing your clothes by hand. You rub them against one another to remove any dirt or debris, then plunge them into the boiling water. Maybe you have a fancy washing machine, but no electricity to power it, so you heat the water over a fire. Once everything is nice and toasty, you add some soap and you're ready to scrub. And here is where things start to get really unpleasant. With no modern fabrics or dyes, each garment needs to be worked over by hand to ensure that the soap bites into both the fabric and the skin of the garment. This means that the water can't be too hot or you might damage the clothing. But it also can't be too cold or the soap won't work properly. After several hours of this, you wring out your clothes by hand, twisting and squeezing heavy, sopping wet fabric. Until every last drop is removed, you leave the clothes to dry, wrap yourself in a blanket, and head inside to warm up by the fire. Oh, and don't forget to mop up all that water you splashed onto the floor. Otherwise, it'll freeze and you'll have to walk around your laundry hut or kitchen on a minefield of slick ice patches. This whole process needed to happen at least twice a year, once in the fall and again in the spring. And if you weren't careful, your laundry cave would turn into a damp cave filled with mist, the walls dripping with condensation. Then there was the smell. Oh, the smell. Can you imagine a pungent mix of wood smoke, wet wool, and the acrid sting of lye soap? Delightful. And if you were poor, you had fewer clothes to rotate. That meant washing what little you owned more frequently, often while still damp, just to avoid living in filth. But you know what? Even that wasn't the worst part. Oh no, the absolute worst part of all of this was still to come: drying. Racks of dripping, sopping wet clothes were the perfect place for mildew to grow. So they had to be hung away from walls and preferably away from each other. If you were lucky enough to own a dryer, you would load it up and wait for it to finish. But many families didn't even own a dryer, much less one that was hooked up to electricity. So they had to dry their clothes the old-fashioned way, by hanging them on a line outside. But during the winter, there was a problem. See, when your clothes are dripping wet and the temperature is below freezing, well, you get icicles. Icicles on your clothesline, icicles on your clothes, and worst of all, icicles forming on your hands. And if you're not careful, those icicles can break off and slice your skin, leaving it raw and open to the freezing temperatures. So there you have it, a perfectly miserable experience made even more miserable by the winter weather. But hey, at least you got clean clothes, right? Thanks for watching. When you think about winter chores, what's the worst part? Let me know in the comment section. And as always, thanks for watching. Oh, I forgot to mention the worst part. Now you have to deal with the clothesline in the winter. Have fun with that. Let us know in the comments if you've ever had to deal with a frozen clothesline. And then stay tuned for more historical tales, including more stories about life in the 1800s. Now, we're used to being able to toss our dirty clothes into a machine, press a few buttons, and have it clean and dry before the end of the day. But did you know that washing clothes by hand wasn't all that uncommon even into the 1900s? And the problem wasn't just getting them clean, it was getting them dry. But don't worry, because Aunt Martha had a solution to every household problem. First, here's what you'll need: an outdoor clothesline, some sturdy hooks or nails, a good strong ladder, a hatchet, a block of wood, and a stout clothesline rope at least 2 inches thick, because you'll be needing to wrestle it into place. Now, this whole process is easier said than done, so let's get started. First, take down your old clothesline and replace it with the new one. Securely nail or hook each end of the rope to a tree or post. You'll want it strung up taut like a high wire because there will be a lot of weight bearing down on it. Step into your sturdiest footwear, pull on some thick gloves, and climb the ladder to where the line is secured to the roof. Here's the trickiest part. With the hatchet, you'll need to cut away the old rope, making sure that the sharp end of the hatchet faces away from you. Pass the new rope over the end of the hatchet and then, using both hands, pull it tight. As you slide the hatchet down the rope, keep your eye on that sharp end. Once you're finished, trim off any excess rope. Do the same thing on the other side. Then bring down the ladder and admire your handiwork. You're ready to hang the wash. In the winter, make sure to leave a couple of inches between each piece of clothing so that the air can circulate. This will help the water evaporate faster. But as the sun sinks lower in the sky, the light fades and your work isn't done. If you've got small children, get them to help you with this next part. Hand them some warm, soapy water in a bucket and send them along with the wash. When the family is gathered around the table for supper, let them go from house to house delivering the fresh-tasted laundry to their neighbors. And in return, they'll bring you back the dried items that you sent out earlier. It's a great way to build community and save energy. As the old saying goes, a stitch in time saves 9. Don't wait until your clothes are so dirty they need to be washed. Launder them as soon as possible. That way they won't need such a strenuous scrubbing. And if you're worried about those pesky moths that seem to target woolens, there is a way to prevent them from paying your wardrobe a surprise visit. Before you stuff those clothes into your steamer, take some time to inspect them carefully. Check the pockets, turn the garment inside out, and look again. If you find any moths or moth eggs, immediately treat the item. The best way to kill any bugs is with a hot iron. Steam clean those pockets thoroughly and pay special attention to seams and linings. If the infestation is particularly bad, put the garment in a plastic bag, seal it tightly, and then put it in the freezer. The cold will kill the remaining moths or eggs. After a week or so, you can safely store your woolens. They'll look and smell fresh. Nothing says, "I'm with stupid," quite like a dirty shirt. It's easy to think of the 1800s as a time when everyone was poor and lived in poverty. But despite hardships like these, people still managed to find ways to laugh. Did you know that there were minstrel shows, music halls, and even traveling comedians during this time period? And the jokes they told weren't all that different from the ones we hear today. Some were even downright silly. Welcome to life in the 1800s. Today we're going to do your laundry. Now, before we begin, be sure to like this video and subscribe so that we can take over your feed and make history come alive. Now, let's go back to the stinky situation at hand. In the 1800s, laundry wasn't just a private matter. It was a performance. Every week, families had to put on a show for their neighbors to prove they were respectable, especially in towns and villages where gossip traveled faster than the washing line. If your linens looked dingy, your neighbors knew it. And they were unafraid to let you know that your collars were yellow or your aprons stained or your socks hadn't seen soap in weeks. For women, failing at laundry meant failing at their role as caretakers. Husbands expected crisp shirts and spotless handkerchiefs. Children were scolded for looking unkempt, as if their mother's effort or lack of it was written on their sleeves. And in winter, excuses about frozen tubs or impossible drying rarely earned sympathy. Society still demanded the same spotless results, no matter how brutal the weather. This pressure created a grim rhythm. Monday was wash day, Tuesday was ironing day. By midweek, clothes were folded and put away, only for the cycle of filth to start again. Women joked bitterly that laundry was never finished, only interrupted. And if a family couldn't keep up, well, their dirty laundry aired in public. Before washing machines and indoor plumbing, the weekly ritual filled every home with steam and the sound of splashing water. For poor women, laundry was a daily battle. With too little soap, too few supplies, too much dirt, and not enough time, they struggled to keep up with the impossible standards. But there was no escaping the weekly chore. And if they couldn't do their own family's laundry, they did the laundry of others. In the 1800s, the wealthy often hired laundresses to wash their clothes. These women typically came from poor families who had more pressing needs than clean underwear. Often working from dawn until nightfall, these women washed clothes in other people's homes or in communal spaces like backyards or sheds. Working outdoors, they were at the mercy of the elements. In summer, they toiled under a merciless sun. In winter, they scrubbed by the light of a single oil lamp. No matter the weather, they did the same back-breaking work, heating water, separating soiled clothing, scrubbing, rinsing, hanging out to dry. Laundresses didn't just do the dirty work. They also endured verbal abuse from employers who sometimes watched over their shoulders or ordered them about like servants. Laundresses had no job security. They could be fired for making a mistake or for being slow, and there was no unemployment insurance if they fell ill or gave birth. Their workday began before sunrise, and if they wasted time, they might not finish in time to catch the last train home. In big cities, some laundresses banded together to share equipment and tips, but mostly they were alone, responsible for the cleanliness of other people's houses. Few jobs paid better than being a laundress, but most people couldn't afford to pay well. Laundresses were almost always women, and the work was dangerous. The chemicals used for cleaning were highly toxic and sometimes deadly. At least one woman died each year in England from working as a laundress. Many laundresses suffered from chronic bronchitis and skin diseases. Still, they showed up to work every day, driven by hunger, because a laundress's pay, though meager, was steady. And in the Industrial Revolution, that meant everything. Whether done by hand or machine, laundry was never ending. The Industrial Revolution changed little. Mass-produced textiles and new dyes made clothing cheaper, but also dirtier. Working people wore their clothes until they fell apart. And no matter what, they had to keep up appearances. Cleanliness was next to godliness. It was also next to employability, social mobility, and self-respect. And if you failed to keep up your end of the bargain with society, the consequences could be dire. People simply couldn't afford to wear dirty clothes, literally. So next time you find yourself doing laundry, whether by hand or machine, think of all the people who came before you. Maybe they did their laundry in a river not far from where you're doing yours right now. Or maybe they were one of the first pioneers to introduce laundry machines into their homes. We may not remember their names, but we can thank them for teaching us the importance of clean clothes, even if it means spending our lives doing laundry. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe so that we can take over your feed and make history come alive. For our next story, let's talk about some jobs that need to get done even in the harshest of weathers. Have you ever wondered how people did their laundry in the 1800s? In those days, doing the wash was no simple matter. It was a full-on production that demanded a grim arsenal of tools, many of which were as punishing as the weather itself. First up was the washtub. These were typically made of wood or tin, big enough to swallow entire bundles of linens. But don't think of those handy plastic bins you have in your own laundry room. The tub itself was just the beginning. The real work got done on the washboard, a long, narrow board with a series of ridges where the clothes were rubbed back and forth until the dirt surrendered, or at least until the fabric wore thin. Then there was the boiling kettle. This was usually a hefty cast-iron pot that needed to be filled with water from the well and heated over a fire that demanded constant tending. Mind you, this wasn't your typical tea kettle. We're talking about a vessel big enough to hold several gallons of water. The heat from the fire would eventually bring the water to a rolling boil, at which point the dirty laundry got dumped in. The whole thing would then simmer for hours on end, occasionally producing a plume of steam that carried with it the aroma of stale, stagnant water and whatever else you had managed to scrape off your person or more likely your animals. To make things truly filthy, the soap, no fancy liquid gold here. In the 1800s, soap was made of lye and tallow, which is rendered animal fat. It came in coarse blocks that burned the nose with their sharp odor. Each bar was about as effective as a modern-day laundry detergent. Except you had to grate it yourself. No prepackaged powder here. Every bar was about as effective as a modern-day laundry detergent, except you had to grate it yourself. No prepackaged powder, no pods, just you and the cold, hard bars of soap. Every tool seemed to take as much out of the washer as it gave back in results. And in winter, even these tools became obstacles. Washboards froze if left outside. Wooden tubs cracked in the frost. Soap turned brittle and crumbled. And the water froze solid if not watched constantly. A moment's delay meant starting over with fresh buckets from the icy well. Now imagine the scene. It's the dead of winter. You're knee-deep in a freezing cold kitchen, fire almost out, the kettle's unfilled, the water's frozen in the trough. Steam rises from the grimy water, mingling with the smoke from the dying fire. Outside, the wind rises, rattling the windows like a skeleton in a graveyard. Suddenly, the door bursts open and in strides a figure wrapped in a threadbare shawl, their face weathered and lined like an old leather boot. They're soaked to the bone, their clothes heavy with the grime of a day's work. With a tired sigh, they dump their buckets into the frigid water, the icy shock jolting them back to life. The fight against the elements has begun. In summer, laundry was a chore, but in winter it was a battle against nature itself. For our ancestors, the fight was always the same. Coaxing the stubborn grime from their clothes, battling the freezing water, tending the fire, hoping the soap would hold and praying the sun would shine just a little longer so their clothes could dry before nightfall. It was a daily ritual that transcended social class, geography, and time. It was a testament to the tenacity of the human spirit that in the coldest depths of winter, they managed to stay afloat, both literally and figuratively. These were the women who kept the world turning in the 1800s, one washboard at a time, one cauldron at a time. They faced the bitter cold and the dirtiest of jobs. They scrubbed, they boiled, they battled, and they won, not always against the odds, but always against the clock. For in the relentless march of time, there was no respite, no surrender. There was only the next load of laundry. It is easy to think of laundry as a harmless, even pleasant chore, the smell of fresh laundry, the feel of a newly laundered shirt on a summer day. But think back to a time before automatic washing machines, even before electric irons, and you have the beginnings of a cautionary tale. Because for all the talk of cleanliness being next to godliness, doing your own laundry in the 1800s was closer to a slow form of self-destruction. The constant exposure to hot steam and freezing air, that's not good for your lungs, especially when you're working in poorly ventilated sheds or outside in the open air. Women developed chronic coughs, joint pain, and arthritis from years of twisting and wringing clothes. Their hands were described as red, raw, and ruined, permanently damaged by soap and cold. The constant contact with water caused the skin on their hands to crack, which would become infected with the dirt and grime they scrubbed so hard to remove. It was bad enough in the summer, but in the winter it could be deadly. This wasn't just a hazard of the job. Laundresses who made their living washing other people's clothes suffered the most, but no woman was immune. Take a spin through our video on child labor, and you'll find another workplace where small hands did dangerous jobs. For children, the laundry tubs and fires they played around offered a particular danger. Those same hands that were so dexterous at manipulating tiny toys were also capable of terrible destruction when they reached for a burning ember or wandered too close to a kettle about to tip over, and yet they were drawn to the fire. A small child holding a burning cloth was an image that appeared again and again in newspapers, usually alongside a reminder to employ more care. On a cold winter's day, a fire was a source of warmth, light, and life, a necessity for the clothes that had to be dried, but also a temptation for those trying to warm themselves. Houses weren't heated in the winter, so people would often spend the day in their warmest clothes, then change into something lighter for the evening. These might have been worn several times before they were laundered, so a fire was needed to clean as well as dry them. Only it didn't take much for things to get out of hand. If a pot was left unattended, the water would boil dry, and the next thing you know, flames were licking up the sides of the pot and reaching for the clothes above. Then it was up to women and children to beat out the flames with their aprons or plunge the pot's contents into the nearest tub. Often one fire would spread to another, and soon an entire house was ablaze. As one woman recalled, "I knew if my husband or any of our 5 children had gone to that door to get anything out of the drying room, we should all have been burnt up. Fires weren't the only hazard. Accidents like scalding happened more often than anyone would like to admit." The most vulnerable were small children who played near the boiling water or those whose work or chores kept them barefoot. If a kettle tipped over, it might spill its contents onto unsuspecting legs or feet. In 1859, a 5-year-old girl died after being scalded by hot water that spilled from a carelessly placed kettle. When her mother rushed to her aid, she too was badly scalded. The older girl in the house then attempted to move the still boiling kettle away from the injured pair, but she was only 8 years old and couldn't manage it. By the time help arrived, it was too late. All 3 girls had succumbed to their injuries. So how did people go about their laundry? For an overview of the process, check out our video on wash day in the 1800s. But here we'll focus on what happened next, the process of bleaching and ironing. Most people washed their clothes by hand, either outdoors or in a purpose-built laundry room attached to their house. After the initial wash, the clothes were put into a bleaching solution, which might include ingredients like lye or urine, before being dried outside. If you were lucky enough to own an iron, you could then smooth out the remaining wrinkles. Otherwise, the heavy, wet clothes were hung up to dry, and any excess water was eventually pounded out by hand. In the end, laundry was a necessary evil, something that had to be done but was best left to servants or, if you were desperate, children. When push came to shove, there were few things more dangerous than an empty purse, so most people persevered, enduring aching joints, blistered hands, and singed eyebrows in pursuit of that elusive dollar. For more ways that life in the past was scarier than it looks today, try Why Being a Victorian Housewife Was Like Living in a Horror Movie, or How Risky Was Your Favorite Childhood Game in the 1800s? Or watch this video instead? By the late 1800s, the first mechanical washing machines had appeared, crank-operated drums and mangles that promised to ease the misery of wash day. Though at first they were costly luxuries for most people, wash day in winter remained unchanged. Imagine it, buckets of ice water, blistered hands, smoke-filled kitchen, and finally hanging frozen sheets on the line. It's tempting to imagine the past as quaint or charming, but the truth is darker. Washing clothes in winter was not picturesque, it was punishing. It stole time, health, and energy, all for the sake of maintaining appearances and avoiding gossip. When you pull warm, clean laundry from your machine today, spare a thought for those who came before, the women who cracked ice just to fill their tubs, the laundresses who wrung heavy sheets until their fingers bled, the families who wore damp garments, risking illness because winter gave them no choice. The story of winter laundry in the 1800s is not just about dirt and soap. It's about survival, endurance, and the relentless weight of domestic labor in a world far colder than ours. The first rule of washing in cold weather was never wash on a day that's too cold. That sounds obvious, but it wasn't always easy to judge. Once temperatures dropped below freezing, every available source of heat became precious and every hour of daylight a luxury. Families would rise before sunrise to complete their chores and get their laundry done before nightfall. But what if it was 35 degrees Fahrenheit? Too cold to wash outside, but what if the fire wasn't lit? Too risky to wash inside. Women found themselves paralyzed by indecision. Having too little heat was one problem, but so was having too much. In a wood or coal-burning stove, a hot fire could boil a pot or heat an oven, but it couldn't manage both at the same time. The laundry fire had to be carefully managed, tended by a woman whose job it was to keep the flames low and steady, coaxing warmth without wasting fuel. She might feed small bits of kindling into the firebox, poke the embers with a poker, or place a kettle on top the stove to catch any stray sparks. A single misstep could send flames leaping skyward and scorch the ceiling. A spark could set the house ablaze or send deadly carbon monoxide seeping through the floorboards. There was no such thing as a laundry room, only rooms that sometimes did laundry. And those rooms were shared with family members sleeping in the same space, eating in the same space, working in the same space, breathing the same air. The temperature inside the house was also carefully regulated for the sake of the clothes. Hot water could shrink or distort fabric, and boiling water could ruin it entirely. Laundry kettles were usually kept at a rolling boil, just below the point of overflowing. Some families used 2 kettles, one inside the other, with a close-fitting lid on the inner pot. This allowed the water to reach a gentle boil, but it was also easier to manage. Even so, someone had to tend the fire at all times, ready to snuff out any sudden flames. When it came time to wash, the water had to be cooled before it was even usable. Imagine filling a bathtub with hot water, then dumping bucket after bucket of ice into it until it reached the right temperature. That's exactly what these women did. They would begin filling their tubs in the morning, letting the water slowly cool throughout the day, and still it might not be cool enough for washing. On particularly frigid days, they added sawdust to their tubs. Sawdust absorbed heat and helped the water cool faster. The very air grew thick with the sound of dripping water and the smell of cold, soapy suds. It was a symphony of winter played on the human body, the endless cycle of adding more ice, stirring the water, waiting, testing, until at last the temperature was right. In the end, none of this mattered if the clothes didn't get cleaned. Dirt, oil, and sweat were impossible to remove from fabric without the proper tools, ventilation, and temperature controls. For most families, the best they could hope for was a garment that looked as though it had been cleaned. When the water was finally ready, it was time for the next battle, one that was fought in every home where laundering was done. It was a battle against rot, mildew, and the countless bacteria that thrive in dark, damp places. In the end, it was a losing battle. No matter how much scrubbing, boiling, or airing out clothes, there was always a lingering smell of damp on freshly washed fabrics. And that meant there was always a lingering danger of illness. Even as late as the 1800s, doctors believed that dirty clothes caused disease. That illness was spread by soiled linens and unwashed garments. If you couldn't afford to buy new clothes, you couldn't afford to wear damp clothes. You couldn't afford to wear damp clothes. You couldn't afford to risk pneumonia or consumption. So families put on whatever they had layer over layer, until they were barely able to move. They endured chafing, aching joints, itchy skin, and the ever-present fear of infection. All the while, their bodies grew weaker, and the endless cycle of laundering continued.